All right, perfect. Looks like this is also going. Let's see. Let's go over to Reddit. Northern Sierra. Very nice. All right. Let's see who's here. Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Perfect. We have some people there. And here we go.
Okay, live streamed. Okay, here I am.
There we are. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. How am I looking here? Have I got?
Very well. Oh, hair is amazing.
I was just digging under things and didn't see it until the screen that my hair was sticking up. Let's see. So we look pretty good here. I've got my Yeti microphone nearby me, and looks like our video is just fine. I got my cool new background. I just moved into a new house this summer and got a new
Really?
office that I'm still
Congrats.
playing with, but all the stuff in the background is all my books that were in storage for 2 years.
Isn't that an amazing feeling when you can get them out of storage? Actually
Oh
put
my
them up on
gosh,
a
I'm so
shelf.
happy that they're all back there.
Hmm.
I'm ridiculously old school that I have this ridiculous quantity of books, but I won't let go of them. It's like a piece of art that weighs 3,000 pounds, but I won't let go of it.
Or 3,000 individual pieces of art that you won't let go of.
I think
Yeah.
my box count was something in the 60s. So I had like those office
Wow.
boxes full of
Uh-huh.
60 books. For 2 years,
That's
I just
incredible.
picked like my 200 favorite books and they were with me. But now I have more. Oh, you cut out. You totally dropped off.
Yeah,
Oh
I
no, you were
did.
the host now. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think I might have accidentally slid back on the touchpad um, for that. All right.
Hello, Carter, and hello, Odawalowski. I see two other people in here.
I have to
I'll take my
just
glasses
open.
off unless I need to read something.
All right. So it looks like we have just about everybody that's going to be here for the moment. I'm just going to be open up that Reddit AMA just so we can get to those questions in a little bit. And then right after that, I think I'll go ahead and start introducing everybody and then getting the ball rolling with this. All right. So let's
Sounds
just check
good.
these questions. Ah, very good. Okay. Without further ado, thank you, everybody, for showing up. All three of our constituents. I believe we have some more over on YouTube as well. And of course, thank you, Dr. Edwin Barnhart, for joining us today. First, I would like to say a little bit of a land acknowledgement. I see a lot of archaeology shows, live streams doing this, and I think it's appropriate. Personally, I am coming from the border between Miwok and Yokutsland out in California. And that being said, I will try my hand at saying the Miwok language of Kutsi Hi Ima or Kutsi Hasi Hasin A'a. And that is to say, good morning, everybody, or good day to you. And also, how are you doing today?
Mhm.
We'd love some feedback from you. We
Oh,
are overjoyed that all of you are joining us today. Um, did we have some input?
1 second.
All right. Yeah, so that is where we're from. And today, Chickasaw, nice. Oh, very nice. We have some other land acknowledgments coming in from the audience. So doing wonderfully there. Um, that being said, we will be introducing our host, or not our host today, our guest today, Dr. Edwin Barnhart, a lifelong anthropologist, I believe. He's been working for, I want to say, 30 years by now in the field in different accommodations and roles. Most known for his mapping at Palenque. Am I correct in saying that that was a not a revolutionary, but a turn away from standard practices in order to map that site?
Well, I definitely did some uncommon practices, but part of it was that I was relatively new to mapping, and I had all sorts of ideas that I wanted to see in mapping. I guess
Mhm.
the biggest one was color. I mean,
Mm,
before my time, it was standard to make everything black and white and designate things differently on the map by texture. But I thought we live in a color world, so why don't I make it a color map? And it's very pretty like that. And I was told by a German museum that did
mhm,
a exhibit on the history of mapping. This was like a decade
mhm.
ago, but they called me up and asked if they could use my map because they called it paradigm shifting, that everybody had started making maps like I was making. And
Wow.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And sometimes that shows even like our favorite Russian that started discovering exactly what those Mayan hieroglyphs were. Sometimes a fresh perspective really does shift the paradigm, brings in more knowledge for it. Um, before Palenque, Dr. Edwin Barnhart was known for rediscovering or going back to the city of Mashna. I believe that was your first field experience, was that not?
Well, I did a whole bunch of shovel bum stuff before that. I did years of contract archaeology where it was just me on basically a chain gang digging in Texas and
Mm,
other places. So it wasn't
gotcha.
my first archaeological experience, but it was my first big project running as a grad student.
Ah, I see. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. And then, since his archaeology field work, he has continued to do his archaeology field work as well as to teach in different other capacities. I understand that you're teaching at a school right now, as well as personally, how I got introduced to you was from the great courses and your courses there, your overview of both Mesoamerican, North American, um, and you have one other for South American cultures as well, correct?
Yes, I've got the very first one I made was I think they call it Lost Worlds of South America. They love a glitzy title. But my latest
They
one
sure do.
actually, which is out now, is on the Olmec. I have a 12
Really?
lecture series on the Olmec that just showed up, just hit the public last month.
That's amazing. I hadn't even heard about that. So
Oh, that was
looks
great.
like,
That was
yeah,
hard to make, but a lot of fun as well. And it's
I
very
bet.
well received right now. Great Courses was
Yeah.
telling me I'm on target to be the second most streamed one of the year.
Wow.
And I'm competing with ones that have 24 lectures where it only has 12. So
12. Yeah, that's an amazing accomplishment. And it's certainly going to get one more viewer after this. I can tell you that.
thank you.
So that's amazing. I'm glad that we brought that up. Bring out some more of your work. Just before we kind of get into that, speaking of these societies that have been, buried for so long, can you talk a little bit about what your, I guess, approach to researching the Olmec was and what you wanted to bring out and how you got those resources?
Well, my approach to researching the Olmecs in preparation for this lecture series, it was wide reaching. I went back to the original publications of the first people that went down there, tried to track down some of the origins of our misunderstandings of the Olmec and try to explain how those happened and became, prevalent in the literature, even though they were wrong.
Hmm.
And but I also did a number of trips down there. I went to the sites myself, and I talked to people at the sites. That's the best part of my job when I get to go and actually interact with folks that live there because we scholars have our perspective, but I find the perspective of people that are the descendants and still living there, more valuable than my own perspective.
Uh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. People that have a lived experience with it are, you can just learn so much more, especially how those ways reflect where they come from as well, which is one of the things that we'll be talking about today. A personalized approach to anthropology is what I tell a lot of people that you bring, very focused on the people and the understanding of how their minds work, how their cultures work. And that being said, we now get to delve into some questions and a little bit of a presentation by yourself as to how these people traded, where they walked, who they traded with, and who their neighbors were, which also gives us just a little bit of an insight into who they were more generally as a people. So, without further ado, we're going to invite Dr. Barnhart to give a little bit of a little showcase on his thoughts on the interconnectedness of mostly North American peoples, I'm understanding, but with
Oh, we can
questions
take the
ranging.
conversation wherever you want.
Sounds good. And I'm sure the questions will range both North and South America. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Edwin Barnhart for the moment.
Thank you very much. I'll try not to filibuster this thing, but I'll get, my perspective on the interconnectedness of the Americas, the ancient Americas, and we'll go from there. So, where would I begin? Well, let me begin with an overarching hypothesis. That being that the peopling of America happened in phases, but in big groups that came across. We really only have solid evidence for the Bering Strait crossing, and I'm sure that there was boat travel as well. So they could have, followed that same track across, but from there, it's an unknown speed how much they got south, how quickly they got south. But following a coastline could get you pretty far, pretty fast, especially in terms of, archaeological time. When I say, pretty fast, 100 years. That's pretty slow for you and I. We can't, we're not even going to be around 100 years unless we're lucky. But so I think that there is a overarching interconnectedness with the religions of the Americas. That they came over with a set of, let's for lack of a better word, primitive ideas that weren't like very elaborated yet, but they had core principles of their cosmology, how the world worked, how we interconnect with it. And that as people inhabited the United States and further south, United States, that wouldn't even happen for, 10, 20,000 years of what I'm talking about. Let's say, the Americas, that they filtered down through with these sets of ideas. And then once they planted themselves for, millennia in these different regions, those core principles flowered into the fully elaborated religions and cosmological views that each one had. And so my approach to the topic is similar to the way linguists back up and look at core words of languages to find out what languages are actually related to each other. And then they even go as far as to create these names for languages that must have existed but no longer exist. Things like, Indo-European, Udo-Aztecan is another one. But these are languages that no one speaks anymore, but that they recreate because they can see the similarities in the languages that exist today. So they backward create these ideas or these languages that don't exist. I think we can do the same thing with cosmological views. We can take their core principles, just like linguists take words like mother, father, tree, water, sky, and those are core, words. And they see their similarities in languages. I think we can do the same thing with cosmology. And so over the years, I've been looking at these different cultures and what they share in common in the Americas as a way to try to get back or to kind of confirm that they were coming from the same source as they entered the Americas. The
Mm.
big one is shamanism. And, shamanism is already a fraught term. It's actually, I think shaman, the term actually comes from Siberia, which in this case is appropriate because I feel like people that were shamans 10, 20, maybe 30,000 years ago in Siberia are the ones that went with the parties that went over to Alaska and then further south. So this idea that there's another world that we can contact spiritually, psychically, and that it gives us power to talk to our ancestors who are gone. It also gives us the power to transform into animals. That's a very common theme from Alaska all the way down to Chile. Indigenous folks that are the, shamans, whatever word they use in their own language, one of their powers is to be able to turn into some kind of animal. And it's always, nobody ever turns into a squirrel. They're always, a jaguar, a bear, a mountain lion, something cool and fierce. But that's an interconnected thing that everybody in the Americas share. And I think that is an echo from a long ago past. Another one that feeds right into that is the nature of the cosmos, the cosmology, the idea that we live in a three-tiered universe, that there's an upper world, there's the middle world, which is the world of humans and animals, and then there's an underworld that isn't like a hell, like Christianity thinks of it, but it's the other world where spirits reside. And when our dead relatives pass away, they go to that spirit world. But we can connect to it through a process we today call shamanism. That again, if you go to Eskimos or you go to people in the Amazon, they will all describe a three-tiered universe. And that I think is also another big connection between these guys. Now, I guess related to that concept as well is if there are three worlds that we can pass between, how do we do it? How do we get to that other world? Well, the dead go to the same world that shamans do. It's this other world. And again, I find from North America down to South America, I have dozens of examples of people talking about it. Not every culture talks about it, but what I'm talking about is the Milky Way. Everybody sees that big Milky Way. Nowadays we walk out at night, we never see the Milky Way because we all live in this light pollution hell. But without light pollution, the Milky Way is this startlingly biggest feature of the night sky. And all of these ancient cultures that I study and their modern descendants, if they've held the tradition, see the Milky Way as the road between this world and the other world. That's a big one too. That one especially feels to me like, boy, not all of these cultures came up with this independently. Now, so my hypothesis is that it was something ingrained in them tens of thousands of years ago and just flowered into their different forms, became, one of those core words of their cosmology. That the Milky Way being the path from this world to the other world is something that the Mississippians talked about a lot. I found a great Eskimo one with people. Sometimes they see it as a road, sometimes they'll talk about it as a river. But both of them are a navigable place to go to the other world. And some of them talk specifically about it being that it's not every day. You can't just jump on the road every day, that it's got to be in this north-south position. And that opens the road. The Maya talk about that north-south position. The Mississippians talk about that north-south position. So, and of course, go all the way down to South America. Now it tilts into a northwest southeast position. It's following the same route as the Urubamba River. And the Urubamba River goes through the Sacred Valley of the Inca. And of course, the Inca are the last great culture of 5,000 years worth of culture in the Andes. But the name for the Urubamba, for some reason, it's not the Urubamba in their language. Actually, not Not surprising that things get renamed all the time, but they called it the Wilcamayo, which is the Milky River. So again, they're talking about this Milky Way as this passage between this world and the other. So that's one. I also, generally to that, I see a lot of instances of what I call terrestrial space mirroring celestial space. When people thought, how do we harmonize our architecture, our civilization, our communities, our settlement patterns to the world, there are a number of cultures throughout the Americas that try to mirror what they see up in the heavens in the arrangement of their buildings. One really interesting example from North America was the Pawnee. The Pawnee made these star maps on like buffalo hides, and some of them came in. They have these bundles, these buffalo maps, and then they have a satellite of. They did before they were all stuffed into Oklahoma. Had this satellite of different villages that were in locations that mirrored that Buffalo star map. They set up their villages to be in relationship to them like the stars that were in the map. So that's another one. And I guess let's see. I'm almost out of them. One of them that I may or may not really, it may not be as strong as evidence as I'd like it to be, is the Native American concept that your political leaders are also your spiritual leaders, and in many cases, your military leaders as well. Western Europe and other places tend to separate those into different categories of work, but almost a prerequisite to being the leader of one of these ancient communities was your shamanic ability. And it was something that was passed down in a hereditary way. If I have the power, then my kids have the power. So those are all little things that I look at to try to piece this puzzle back together. I like to think of it as, a puzzle that's now completely eroded and, we got 20 pieces of a 500 piece puzzle and we're trying to see the picture. But most of the puzzle pieces are gone. Or it's like, looking at a giant tapestry, but only getting to see 2 inches of it and try to figure out what the pattern is. I really do think that there's a deeper history that all of Native America shares. And it probably happened in a couple of waves. One of the interesting ways we can track it or try to track it is through language. Now, I'm not a linguist, but I'm just a fan of linguistics. But I do know that there are some interesting language groups in North America that bleed down all the way down into Central America. One of the big ones is Uto-Aztecan. When you hear the Aztecan part, you think, okay, Mesoamerica. It's the Aztecs language. I don't know exactly the history of how that language got called that, but I do know that it's a language group that goes from Canada up towards where Alaska is, all the way down the California coast area where you're at, and all the way into Mesoamerica. Once it hits the Zapotec and the Maya, it becomes a different language group that they're all connected to, but it goes all the way down into the middle of Mesoamerica. But if you try to go further south and you go into South America, those languages have no relationship with Uto-Aztecan or any of the stuff in the north, which makes me wonder, were the people in the south the earliest of the groups? They made it farthest down, became isolated in, as much as a 10,000 year period. And then when the Ice Age opened up the bridge again, a second group came in. that had a second language origin. And so I think that there's hints, again, trying to piece together the puzzle that we see today. Language might also be a helper in trying to see not just their interconnectedness, but the phases through which I think there were, and not just me, there are lots of anthropologists and DNA studies now that suggest there were multiple entries into the Americas. There's the traditional one at about 12,000 years ago. Everybody, that's Clovis man theory. Everybody gets that. But then studies coming out of places like A&M are saying there was a previous migration of people that was around 30,000 years ago, and that there may have even been one as far away as 60. It used to be that 30 was the one that you got drummed out of the archaeology meeting for mentioning. Now it's the 61. Now you get to stay in the room if you say 30. Um, another interesting element to this, when we try to put that piece of work into the puzzle, that okay, there were multiple entries of humans into the Americas. There's an interesting thing that I saw long before DNA studies that just, was one of those gee whiz kind of observations that the people of South America, the indigenous folks of South America, like in the Amazon, they are almost 100%, well, that's an exaggeration. The vast majority of them are blood type O. But the people of Central America and North America, they're not O. They're like AB, A and B. So it's interesting, like, how did that happen? How did the guys in the Amazon all have O and their, DNA confirmed connected folks in Mesoamerica, Central America, North America have a different kind of blood type. That was more important to us. Those were things we could see, metrics we could see before the advent of DNA studies. The other weird one I've heard in terms of like multiple migrations is a difference between the Navajo and the Pueblo. Their language, the Navajo have a totally different language, like Dene or something. But they also have, and I've never seen this for myself, but I've read it in a book, that their back molars are different. That they are physically different. Now, this is, I'm also not a physical anthropologist, so forgive me if I'm wrong or flaking around here. But people that are of Asian phenotype have 3 points on the backs of their molars instead of four that I have. Western people have when you if you pulled my molar out and looked at it, it'd have four little crowns on the top of it. Apparently, Asian genome has three, not four. And there was an interesting difference there sometimes. Sometimes if you're just looking at a skeleton, you can almost immediately tell what part of the world it's from just by counting the crowns on its teeth. And of course, now we have DNA studies, which are so thrilling, and there's so many things that we're learning that I didn't even think as a younger student we'd ever be able to get at these questions. Now, I will say in the same breath, though, that I think that DNA is still a very developing science, and it's frustrating to be a fan of it and see some major discovery, but then we learn more, and okay, it wasn't exactly that way because especially when it comes to DNA, this is done by, the guys in the white lab coats who are essentially, the high priests of science these days. So when they say something, the majority of us just take it at face value. And then when they come up a couple years later that was wrong, we're like, hold on, we're, we we have faith in you. How could you how could you be wrong? This is a faith-based endeavor. That's a funny thing to me. I think that so many people think like I'm not religious. I'm a man of science. Well, my old teacher Linda Sheila used to say, oh no, you just traded. a guy in a frock for a guy in a lab coat. You're still just as just as much of a faith-based endeavor. And I've asked my students sometimes in a group that I'm walking around, like, raise your hand if you can sequence DNA. Like, nobody ever raises their hand. Who the hell can sequence DNA? So I try to keep in mind that these incredible discoveries that are presenting new information we never had are done by a small amount of people, and I don't know how they do it. That's an important caution, I think, or at least to admit that this is a faith-based endeavor, and somehow just because they're called scientists doesn't mean, you know, my faith in them is any different than my faith in the neighborhood pastor. Okay, well, that's how's that for a start?
I think that is an amazing start. You bring out a lot of points. I saw a lot of questions coming up, so we're going to try to get through them, but we're going to try to order them in a way that kind of logically leads to the next step. And by doing that, I'm sure that there will be more questions in between to go off on tangents of. So, one that
I'll
I want to
let you
bring
pick the questions. I see them floating by too.
Sounds good. So I'm going to bring up one from Jonathan Hall just a minute, but I want to put a little bit of a roadmap just so we can have some vision for it. He's asking specifically about ancient North Eurasians and how they added to the North American population. I'll read that in just a moment. From there, I want to ask a question that I believe was on the Reddit, talking about the impact of other peoples outside of the Americas. So Pacific Islanders, people up in Alaska, Hawaiians, even perhaps Polynesians, things like that, and how their social structures or even trade routes might have been changed by that. And then going into some things about North America. I know you talked about several different waves of immigration. I'd like to kind of touch on that and how that might lead into the Uto-Aztecan languages and those differences in North America versus South America. So, with a very, very vague roadmap like that, let's ask that first question from Jonathan Hall. I was reading about Malta Buret and the ancient North Eurasians, specifically how they contributed both to European and Native American populations, both of which have a lot of ideas about dogs as guides to the afterlife. So I heard suggestions that these ideas came from the same ancient source. What are your thoughts on this?
Ancient North Eurasian. So we're talking basically the area of Siberia and to the west of it, but up, a lot of what's now Russia and China, and I guess
Mhm.
Mongolia. That would count those areas. Yeah,
Yes.
that's exactly what I'm talking about. That is the jumping off point into the Americas. And I think we should spend more time looking at exactly what Jonathan's suggesting. We should really, you know, we we academics tend to favor Europe and its past as a model. But I think that that's a faulty model, that we should be looking at Eurasian models and things like the dogs and things like ancestor worship are so strong there and not really apparent in Europe. I do think there's a lot of connections there. The dog thing is very interesting. Again, with the help of new DNA studies, we are definitely seeing that the dog evolved from the wolf in that northern Eurasian area. And then it came over to the Americas with man, um, as early as man came over. And so we had a lot of time for those initial species that came over to the Americas to diverge into all sorts of dog species, none of which are around anymore, which is such a drag. I mean, I actually, we just got ourselves a dog. I have a 9-month-old dog named Maeve, who's uh, Australian Shepherd. But I actually looked for a long time to see if I could just find a Native American dog. There are ones that people call Native American, but they're very mixed in with the European ones. I'm digressing now, but anyway, there were some kick-ass great dogs that the Native Americans from north to south had and treasured as their companions. And yes, they did go to the grave with them. Now, South America's over the top. They've actually found an entire dog cemetery that weren't with people, like
Wow.
over 100 dogs somewhere south of Nazca, where it was a dog cemetery.
Wow. And 2 points on that, if I may ask. The region that he's talking about, I just looked up, it is by Lake Baikal, so a little bit further into Mongolia and Inner Mongolia as we know it today, which even more of a point towards the diversification and the time that we had to, really change as we came into the Americas. That second one, oh, I just lost it.
Dog?
Oh, yes, the dog cemetery. Was there any evidence that they were buried perhaps with any honors, social,
Yeah. Yeah, they had like
religious?
objects in their
Okay.
graves and they had individual
Oh, okay.
graves. It wasn't like a hole with a pile of dogs in it. They had individual graves and things in their graves. And
Wow.
some of those cultures even went as far as mummifying dogs.
Wow. So really an indication of not just an emotional connection, but really integrated into their the family, for lack of a better word, into their
Yeah.
actual
Yeah, yeah.
societal
One of
structure.
the funny things I've been tracking for years is the occurrence of you probably know I have this contradictory theory from most of the scholarship that there's a single creator deity in the Andes for thousands of years called the Fanged deity,
Mm,
and he's decapitates people. He's a rough guy. A lot of gods are. But the funny thing about him is, vicious as he is with his fangs, and he's always showing that he severed somebody's head, there's a little puppy that he rolls with that is always there. He is there in so many contexts. And no matter how brutal he's being, there's the little puppy that's like jumping up on his leg and trying to bother him while he's trying to look fierce for us. Or he's like
huh.
standing outside the door while the Fang deity's there. It's amazing. And I do think that that's a great example of this kind of echo. All the way back from Siberia, long time ago, they were treasuring their dogs as man's best friend, and here we have in South America this fierce deity who everyone should fear except his little puppy friend because they're together.
Just so fascinating. Would you think that they represent perhaps two distinct aspects of the deity, or is it just
No,
it,
he's a separate
it's
creature for
just part?
sure. He's
Gotcha.
a he's not an aspect of him. And he shows up in other contexts too. Sometimes the priests of the Fang deity will have this. He's definitely a puppy because he's playful and he's black and white
Interesting.
spotted. He's a very diagnostically recognizable dog. It's not just any dog. It's this dog. In fact, look, I got him right here because I love him.
Oh, really? That's him right there.
Right here. This
Amazing.
is him. This is one that the Moche made with a little thing. There's his little
Hmm.
spots. This is the buddy of the fearsome Fang deity. He's fearsome. He'll cut your head off, but he also loves dogs.
That is fascinating because dogs as well have such a varied characteristic throughout Mesoamerica. So it's fascinating to see how it's reflected in South America as well. And
And such a shame that all the dogs of the Native Americans of the Americas are gone. There was a
yeah.
horrible, not to digress again, and I know we got a lot of questions, but one of the most brutal things that I read that the Spanish did at first contact was in like Cuba and Hispaniola. They were used to
Mhm.
a very meat intensive diet. And the people there ate mostly, corn and other vegetable stuffs that Europe really didn't have before they met them. But the conquistadors were viciously hungry for meat, and the people that were the inhabitants of those islands, the what are they? I'm blanking on the name for some reason. They're the
The Taino?
Taino. Thank you, thank you.
Yes.
Taino women had these little bitty dogs that were like their children, and they'd like dress them up and they'd carry them everywhere like little babies, and they loved them.
Wow.
And the Spanish ripped them away from them and cooked them and ate them. They ate all the people's dogs because they were so hungry for meat that they weren't getting there. What a
Wow.
psychotic thing to do. I mean, can you imagine like your auntie's favorite little dog just getting ripped out of her hands and then she watches somebody eat it? Like, wow, that was a rough entry. Like
Brutal.
that,
Uh,
that like psychological warfare. Everybody was probably just
yeah.
petrified of what, if these guys eat even Auntie's little dog, what won't they do?
And after all the rest that they'd seen, I'm sure that just instilled the fear
Well,
deeper inside of them.
unfortunately, most of that population died within the next 5 or 10 years of infectious diseases. So it
Hmm.
turned out that the dogs were the least of their problems.
Unfortunately, yeah. I suppose that is where the rabid anti-vegetarianism did start. Um, Aside from that from that joke, moving on to semi-related actually, with dogs, or actually sorry, with South America. um, I've heard of a theory. I know there is I watched a video, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Stephen Milo, or Stefan Milo. He's an archaeologist. He focuses mostly on early humanity and stuff, but he has a video detailing more of the science that I heard is that there are populations both in Easter Island and in Central America that share genetic components. And it's, I believe that there were aspects of Central American populations that went to Easter Island. Does this change or uh, further contextualize the population or the peopling of the Americas now that we have another route that we know people were exchanging through?
Well, it has potential to do so, but I don't think it's done it yet. I hadn't heard anything about Central American DNA in Easter Island. That's an interesting one. I'd love you to share that. But I did see the stuff from South America. I think it's specifically the Mapuche people down in
Mm,
Chile area that they're seeing a DNA connection between them and the people of Easter Island. Um, at the moment, I think that the explanation that best fits our evidence at hand is that the people of South America were there a lot longer than the first inhabitants of Easter Island. And that after, let's say, 600 AD, those two cultures developed seafaring to a point where they could meet. But I know, I've been to Easter Island 4 times now. I'm getting better and better with that, and I know that they are strongly Polynesian. Their culture, their cosmology, their worldview is part of the Polynesian sphere. So is same thing with Hawaii. It's the Moana stuff for anybody who has kids and have watched Moana. It's that culture. Whereas South America had a very different culture. I think they did meet, but I don't think it happened until like 1000 AD. And it would produce a pattern where yes, we can find bodies that have the DNA of both groups, but that's intermarriage. That's not um, origin. I think we're confusing origin for late period intermarriage.
interesting.
I did
That is
actually, I
fascinating.
just I was last trip I was there. I met one of my colleagues who I very much respect, Edmundo Edwards, who's been doing stuff around Polynesia forever.
Mhm.
But he said that just recently, and he didn't send me the link, so I'm not sure where to find it. But he said an excavation turned up with a chicken on South America's southern coast. That it was in some sort of like dune buried context, but it was from, if I'm not mistaken, he said from like 1000 AD, and that it was a chicken. and chickens don't occur in the Americas. So how the hell did that chicken get there? If that's correct and the dating of it's correct, which probably is because it's bones, um, that to me is proof that somebody sailed there with a chicken because the only
Mhm.
way it came there was from Asia.
Yeah, fascinating. Because it brings up another piece of evidence that I've seen is that potatoes, sweet potatoes, is the question of, in which area did it originate, and was it brought from Polynesia to the Americas or vice versa? And so I guess what I'm hearing is that there's not a lot of evidence to say that people came from Polynesia to populate South America, but there is at least a few pieces of evidence to say that they traded or at least had some contact, whether that was culture shifting or paradigm shifting or not.
Exactly. Well said. That's exactly what I'm saying is that I don't think we have the evidence to say that South America was populated through Polynesia, through boat travel across the islands from southern Asia to South America. I don't think we have enough evidence to say that at the moment, but we do have enough evidence to say that there was contact between Polynesia and South America. How much of it? We're not sure. My buddy Edmundo Edwards, who is unapologetically Team Polynesia, says, okay, so we have some evidence that they met each other by boat travel. So who do we think did it? The guys with the little balsa reed rafts that can't go very far off the coast? Or was it the Polynesians who had already sailed for the last 10,000 years from Asia and gotten that far? Which one of them made the boat that could make the journey? He's team Polynesia, and I think he's got a good argument there. I mean, the South Americans made some great boats. Don't get me wrong; those ones, especially up at Lake Titicaca, they're great, but they're no catamaran. The catamaran is a piece of technology that
Mm,
never occurred in South America. And that's another reason, that to think that the contact was occasional and not continuous. You would
gotcha.
think
So
that if they met each other enough and the Polynesians showed up with their kick-ass catamarans, that the the South Americans, just out of practicality, would start using that technology. But we don't have it.
you don't have it. That so interesting because then you have to think about, what was the mindset of the people that they were visiting in South America? Why did they not, I suppose, believe that this piece of technology would be beneficial overall for their way of life? So that
And
is
that's
absolutely
complicated, isn't it?
fascinating.
I mean, there's
It,
there yeah, you can get very ingrained in your traditional ways and reject things that are practically very helpful because it's just not your way. I find an interesting example of that is how long it took corn to actually take place and be farmed in the American Southwest. Now the Pueblos have these amazing drought-resistant forms of corn, but it turns
mhm,
out that corn first made it to like let's say modern day New Mexico at like 2000 BC. There's
mhm,
evidence in dry caves of corn there at 2000 BC, but it took another uh 2000 years or maybe 1500 before anybody was actually farming it. So here
mhm.
was, a a life-giving miracle plant that they just kind of offhand rejected for a millennia or so.
Yeah. And am I right in saying that, if I remember correctly, that it was actually a second introduction of corn because it was a different variety of corn that actually came into the region
You're absolutely
after
right.
that?
About
Yeah.
100 BCE, a second strain, and these are from DNA studies, the ones that I'm hopeful but skeptical about. They probably got the corn thing right. I don't know. But yeah, there was a second wave of people around 100 BCE, and that brought corn up and a different strain of corn, and that's around that time is when it really started to take.
Fascinating.
And then
Fascinating.
it didn't
So,
get to the Mississippians for another 900 years. I mean, all the early
wow.
groups, the Hopewell, the Adena, none of them are farming corn at all. It's not until about the rise of the Mississippian civilization, and some would argue that it was corn that allowed them to rise and gather in larger populations than ever before. But how strange that, a place that was two places that were easily walkable, why did it take, 1,500 years and then another 900 years to make it to the Mississippi, which is, full of corn now? Weird
Absolutely.
disconnects.
Very, very strange disconnects. And speaking of these disconnects, I actually want to start to look at two questions that I believe are two sides of the same coin, and that is from some questions here, some about language and change and how we track that, and then also about genetics. From your previous answer, somebody had brought up, I believe that was on YouTube. Um, is there a way to improve understanding between genetics and archaeology? Scary to think that archaeologists are not being trained on sequencing interpretation. That is from the Teutonic Toltec. So if you could speak to that on,
Let me
is
see if I
there
can come down
is
here.
there a way that we
Teutonic.
are advancing in genetic testing in a way that we're going, or is it just kind of we have to take answers as they come up and just wait until they are either proven and backed up or disproven?
Well, let me preface what my opinion on there that I've been out of, the halls of academia for some time now, and I'm not a physical anthropologist. I would hope that as what's his name? Toltec?
Hmm.
That was a great name. Um, I hope that physical anthropology classes are now incorporating DNA studies.
Hmm.
But as a group, archaeologists are kind of artifacts in and of ourselves. We get very set in our ways, what we study, what we don't study, and we tend to farm out the the chemistry and the science stuff to the other fields. Like, let's take a simpler example that's been around for 80 years now. Carbon 14 studies. Um, that's a chemistry process that we all rely on, but the vast majority of archaeologists I know, just about all of them, uh, they we take our sample, carefully collect it as told, and then we send it to a lab. And then the lab tells us what our dates are. So, and there's very few people that I ever run into in the field that do this. There's the most famous carbon 14 studier that is that works with archaeology is Tom Stafford out of Colorado here. But he's the only name I know. It's funny. I mean, we do rely on other branches of science, chemists and biologists, to deliver us those answers. We deliver them the sample, they analyze it, give us our facts back. It's interesting. I guess another problem with it is that chemists and medical industry and those guys have actual well-paying jobs. Archaeology's like most of us are just scraping by for our budgets. So it's hard to I think make a living if you know how to sequence DNA. You can make a shitload more money than working with archaeology. I'll tell you what. So we don't get if an archaeologist figured out how to sequence DNA, he would be quite tempted to go get a better paying job.
Mm. Mm. So it sounds like part of it is that interdisciplinary approach where, especially in archaeology, it seems like the different fields or subsets are very stratified from one another. Even just hearing you talk about, physical versus linguistic versus cultural, versus, all these different types of archaeology, they seem to be a little bit separated from each other, and how much more so a
And the field
completely
for some
different.
reason does that. They did it in my generation. I was told that I needed to specialize in something or I wouldn't have a place in archaeology. You got to be a ceramics guy or a lithics guy or a linguist or a you can't be everything.
Hmm.
And my apprentice now, Luke Caverns, who was looking into going into programs, got the same story from people that you will go nowhere
Mm,
unless you specialize. And so, I like interdisciplinary groups. That's great. I love it when we're on a project that, we've got our osteologist who can identify the bones that are coming out. We've got our ceramicist who tells us, what kind of pottery that is, and so on and so on. But the field encourages people to narrowly focus in on a particular topic, sacrificing other ones. Whereas, like the tradition in classic archaeology, classic, which is basically, Greek, Roman, the classic world, those guys are taught an entirely different way that they should be really broad.
really.
That you can't
Hmm.
be a classicist unless you understand how to read, Greek writing, and you've got to understand the art, and you got to understand the religion and the architecture. They have a tradition that encourages their students to be much more rounded. And for some reason, the traditions in American archaeology are different. They encourage us to focus on a narrow topic and then assemble teams of everybody who knows one part of it, which I don't think that's good.
Yeah, yeah, because I was just going to ask, in the vein of what you're doing more so now, science communication. Do you think that helps or hinders, where you can have such precise information, but then again, it is so far removed from the general understanding?
Well, if you get a good team together, it's great. But if you're lacking people in that, you could actually irresponsibly, destroy evidence, not knowing what you're looking at.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have an unpopular opinion that I keep saying on these podcasts that archaeology is not science. Archaeology is a technique to dig stuff up. The second we
Interesting.
start trying to figure out what that stuff we dug up is, we're wearing another hat. Maybe we're a chemist who's dealing with, soil chemistry or the DNA. Maybe we're a historian who's, or a more typical anthropologist who's trying to fit what we found into our known narrative of history and culture. So archaeology is simply a technique to unearth things to which we apply other sciences.
Gotcha. So archaeology is simply five different sciences in a trench coat.
Well, archaeology is the ditch digger. The guys in the trench coat are standing outside the hole waiting for him to hand it up so they can do something smart with it.
That is fascinating. I had thank you for that perspective. I had no idea that there it was so stratified, and so
Well, truth be known, a terribly unpopular perspective. In fact, I'm shooting myself in the foot. If we're not science, National Science Foundation will never give us any money. People would really like me to stop saying that.
we'll edit that out
But
of
it's
the
not
stream
it's
for
not a
you.
repeatable experiment. The core of
Yeah.
a scientific experiment is scientific method, the null hypothesis, and the repeatability of the experiment is essential. That way, another independent group of scientists can come in and replicate or refute your results. But
Mhm.
archaeology is not like that. We dig the hole, it's gone. Nobody can go back in and do that dig again. It's by its nature a destructive process. And
Mm.
over the years, I've become less and less a fan of actual excavations. I would really like us to be able to figure out everything we can from surface clues and the last, 200 years of archaeology. You know how many
Absolutely.
bones and artifacts there are, gathering cobwebs in the bottom of every museum and university in America. It's an outrageous amount, and I would love to see a whole generation just go back through that stuff. I mean, just the bones themselves. Geez, I was just in Wales, and I brought a group around the Neolithic, megalithic tomb sites, and was talking to
Hmm.
some archaeologists there, and they would be like, "Oh yes, and in the 1890s they excavated this site and they found 50 skeletons." Like, where are those
Where they
skeletons?
go?
Like, I don't know. Like, shouldn't somebody find those and apply, first carbon 14 to them and then DNA studies? There's so much we could learn about these Neolithic people by just simply applying our DNA studies to the bones that we collected 150 years ago. But
Yeah.
where are they? Somebody could spend an entire career and probably come up with some amazing stuff about that, journey of Neolithic farmers, which spread all the way down up through Europe, probably from the Mediterranean. But gosh, so much archaeology's already been done that we have lifetimes to just reanalyze the shit in the basements of museums.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking to the pieces of evidence that we already have, we have a question from, I'll bring up their name a little bit later, but they're talking about exactly that, is that we have so many things above ground already. And especially when we talk about, not hunter-gatherer societies, but very mobile societies, their ways of being don't give easily to a lot of physical archaeology, right? Other than ceramics, other than middens, things like that. So their question specifically is asking if I can bring it up. Um, it was just a little lower, but it was bad. Sorry, I just had it. Um,
Thousands of
Perhaps it was
artifacts
not.
and documents rotting away in museums. It's heartbreaking. Oh, that wasn't a question. That was just
What
that's
we're all
yeah, yeah,
thinking.
that whole like, I grew up watching Indiana Jones, and his tagline was, "That belongs in a museum." Sadly, now as an actual adult archaeologist, I think, no, it doesn't. That's the fucking worst place for it. It'll, if it's not a spectacular object on display, it's languishing in the basement with a lack of preservation money. And it's not like, the museums aren't evil. Don't give me, they're doing the best they can. But the trouble with museums and archaeology in general is that in economic terms they say we produce neither guns nor butter. We are not making anything that's an object people find of value. So we just spend money. There's a small portion of our society that's interested in participating in this kind of discussion and understanding our past. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people don't have any interest in the past. It's in the past, in their
Hmm.
opinion. Why the hell would we
Yeah,
spend money on that when, we could be making guns or butter?
exactly. Why enrich ourselves in our understanding of the world when we can just enrich ourselves materially?
A
Um,
perennial argument.
Absolutely. Back to that question. Speaking
You
on the
find it?
opposite side of physical artifacts, yes. Quote from MJM 682 or 68 2000, I believe. Not much study seems to have been done on pect, circles, and crosses. How might their prevalence be an example of cultural diffusion in Mesoamerica? P.S. I love all of your videos and your podcasts.
Well, thank you very much, MGM. Let's see. Pecked circles and crosses. I believe what they're talking about are those ones that originated in Teotihuacan.
Mhm.
And they are interesting. They're pecked into a number of contexts in Teotihuacan, and we found them as far up as the American Southwest. And I know I've seen one personally, at least as far as Huachactun in the Guatemalan rainforest, which makes sense because Teotihuacan contacted those people and went up north as well. I guess not American Southwest. I guess the farthest north one I know is the site of Alta Vista, which is like
Mm.
right near the equator. I actually think that it's them and one called Quemada. I think that the pecked cross and the and circles are Teotihuacan investigating the sun. I find it
Mm.
fascinating that the farthest north we find that pecked cross, which has kind of a, you know, it has a very compass look to it. And it worries me that maybe I'm seeing what I want to see through my Western eyes that, oh, a cross with a circle around it, that must be for navigation. But it is interesting that the farthest north one we've ever found is right on the Tropic of Cancer.
Mm.
Mesoamerica were interesting. They were some of the only civilizations in the world that reached their height, but within the tropics. So when they're investigating their astronomy, they see something that the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans never saw, which is zenith passage. The day that the sun's directly over our head. But it doesn't happen like summer solstice, right? Happens June 21st. Whether you're in Russia or in California, and up until, that if you go to the southern hemisphere, that's winter solstice, but it's always the same day, the day that the sun is the farthest north and the longest day of the year, farthest south, longest day of the year for here. Zenith doesn't work like that. It's latitude dependent. The day that the sun will be directly over your head changes in date by your latitude. And so we know that Mesoamerica was investigating it. I think that Teotihuacan was. And the funny thing about the Tropic of Cancer is that on that line, summer solstice, June 21st, is zenith passage. It's on
Mm.
that day the sun will go directly over your head at that latitude. If you go north, it will never go over your head. If you go south from that line, it'll happen twice, passing it back and forth up. So that Tropic of Cancer and that pecked cross that's there, maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think it has something to do with them tracking their understanding of zenith passage and the sun. But we actually do have there's a lot of stuff. Look to the person that asked the question, MGM. Look up the names Horace Hartung and Anthony Avini. Those are two of our early archaeoastronomers who did a lot of work on it. There's another guy I'm blanking on the name of who did it, but those guys, if you look up like Anthony Avini's archaeoastronomy work and the Pecked Cross, you'll find his quotes on it, and that will have references to the sources he referenced. You look in the bibliography, you'll find probably, to your surprise, a lot of talk about these Pecked Crosses. I'd like to find more.
Very nice. So I actually have a question jumping off of that is one of my personal questions is the relatedness between Oasia America, so the Southwest and Mesoamerica, because I've been finding a lot of, I I guess you could say artistic similarities or similarities in symbols as well. And I actually was thinking that he was talking about the spirals and the concentric circles that are found a lot in the Southwest. There is evidence that there was trade, parrots in, um, oh, why am I blanking on the actual site? In a few different sites, more near the Chacoan region towards the west.
Uh,
Um,
Pakime, were you thinking about Pakime?
Pakime, and then there are also some in like northwest Mexico as well that have evidence of aviaries within their grounds. So we know that there was interplay between them, but do we have any evidence that those cultures in the Southwest, being around those Uto Aztecan language peoples, had any crossover, had any trade, had any cultural diffusion with Mesoamerica? Either way.
Well, artifact wise, just as you brought up, we've got things like macaws and we've got chocolate in Chaco. We've got actually a huge amount of trade between the Hohokam people and the people of Western Mexico, like Jalisco, Colima. There's a whole lot of information about obsidian and turquoise from there, but also
Mhm.
very similar objects. There's even some people believe that the Hohokam were interconnected to people in South America. There's some very interesting artifact similarities there. But the big one is Paquime, also called Casas Grandes.
Casas Grandes. There we go.
Okay, that's an incredible site. That's half Pueblo with the the mud brick Pueblo apartment style living, and then there's a channel through the middle of the site, and another part of the site has pyramids and ball courts and people who were sacrificed and buried under the ball courts. A number of clear evidences of human sacrifice. So there's a fascinating site that does look to be kind of like an amalgam between Mesoamerica and the American Southwest, more Pueblo and Mogollon. I think it's actually
Mhm.
the people we call Mogollon that were connected to Casas Grandes. Steve Lexon has that cool Chaco Meridian thing that he believes is
Mhm.
pointing straight down to Paquime or Casas Grandes. The, but so we have a whole lot of artifacts, and we even have a site that combines the two artifacts from the regions. They were definitely trading, but how much the cultures actually blended together. There's one piece of evidence that I would really like to see that I have never found to make that better argument that the Southwest was influenced heavily by Mesoamerica, and that is the 260-day calendar, the Solkine. The Maya call it the Solkine. The what are the Aztecs call it the Tenopawali or something, but Tenopawali. But it's a calendar of 260 days that absolutely every Mesoamerican culture follows as their day-to-day calendar. They ascribe personality and destiny traits based on the day you were born in that calendar. And every culture from the very beginning, like the Olmec, the earliest cultures, when we see writing, we see the 260-day calendar. We know they're using it, and it is nowhere in the American Southwest. And it is such a core, time and space concept that if the Mesoamericans couldn't convince them of the 260-day calendar, well, they were literally not on the same time schedule. So to my I I keep searching for it. I've never found it. I don't think I ever will. I think that
Mhm.
the people of the Southwest definitely had connections with the Mesoamericans, but they held their own. They were not absorbed or overly influenced by their culture. They just liked their stuff.
Absolutely. So jumping back to a couple real quick questions, we had from the question before, uh, is the picked cross the same thing as the kin kinsunj? Quincunx, kinsush.
Queen cooks, queen cooks.
Quincux, completely
No, not
wrong.
exactly. Not exactly. And we might ask your the person who asked the question. I
Mhm.
could have
That
just
is from
erroneously like talked for 10
Itzli
minutes on a
Ehekate.
subject he didn't even he didn't ask that question.
Oh
The
no, it
Queen
was
Cooks is
a
something
yeah.
different. The Queen Cooks is a symbol that symbolizes the four directions and the center. That like I said at the very start, that all of these cultures have this three-tiered universe. That's, the up and down. But here on our plane, we have east, west, north, south, and the center, and then up, down. So it kind of looks like one of those jacks you throw out when you're playing hopscotch. Uh, but the Queen Cooks at least as far as art history believes it to be, is that symbol that means the four directions in the center. Slightly different, though the cross is interconnected with it. It does have the it's pointing to the four directions by its nature of being a cross. It has a center, but then it's also got that circle around it, which are where the dots come in. The pecks of the dots circle the cross.
Mm. Okay.
And sometimes the cross is a straight carved line, and sometimes it's dots too. So it varies, which is an impediment to us figuring out what the hell it is. Is that are the variations on the theme somehow significant and indicative of its actual function? I
Mhm.
nobody's really come up with
Who
a
knows?
idea, but I do think it's connected to astronomy. And for
Gotcha.
that matter, so is the Queen Cooks because they're both cosmological symbols. How does the world fit together?
Gotcha. Absolutely. Um, Another quick question going back to what we were just talking about with the Hohokam and the Oadam. Do they have their own calendar systems and timekeeping ways, or is that just not evident from what we see?
For those really, we what we think we know comes not from the archaeology, but from their descendants.
Mm,
We know that I don't know much about the Oodam today. I think that their calendar wise, I think they follow essentially the same kind of calendar systems that the Pueblo do, that are lunisolar.
mm,
It's a 365 day year with lunations. They'll talk about, cycles of the moon. And I know like the Zuni they have a moon priest and a sun priest today. And
mm,
those two sometimes interact with each other about when particular like Kachina ceremonies should happen. And it's an interplay. The winter solstice is really important, but so's the full moon. And so like around that time period, they don't just have a festival on June 21st all the time. It's an interplay between the moon and the sun. But I think they're doing, essentially what we do today, which is a 365-day year and months of roughly 30 days. Now the question is, did the last 500 years totally annihilate their old way? And now they're really just doing a indigenous twist on a European calendar? Those are
mm.
hard questions to get at sometimes. Just how great was the influence 400 years ago? Did it totally annihilate their old ways, or did it become a syncretism between the two? But I've never seen, I look around a lot for like counting stuff. Like, I love to see the number 28 or 30. Oh man, is that the moon somehow?
Mhm.
But nothing in that I know of in the Hohokam or Mogollon or Pueblo have ever shown anything to indicate what kind of calendar they have. You go further back beyond them and look at some of that rock art, the stuff that's either, petroglyphs that's pecked in or painted. Every once in a while, like in where is it? The Pecos region of Texas. They've got some stuff that looks like people are counting something. Are they counting days? Are they counting deer? So we don't have enough information to get at it, but I do feel, just take that full circle around. I do feel like the 260-day calendar was such a powerful influence on everybody in Mesoamerica. If Mesoamerica had succeeded in absorbing the American Southwest into their sphere of influence, they would have forced them to adapt the 260-day calendar, and I see no evidence of it.
Yeah, thank you. So, actually, staying in that region a little bit, we have a question from El Ville 55. Did major centers like Teotihuacan, Cusco, and Cahokia, and I myself am going to add one in the Chacoan region as well, did they have significant populations that spent only a portion of the year in those cities, in addition to the city's permanent population? As in, did some groups of people spend part of their year in the countryside and another portion of the year in the big city for trade, work, or other purposes?
Hmm. Well, we've got 4 or 5 different areas. I think that there's not a blanket answer that
Mhm.
answers that question for all 5 of them. If
Absolutely.
you put Chaco Canyon in there, then we've got a real outlier. I think the Chaco
Mhm.
Canyon was empty most of the year, and people came in. Region-wide festivals happened there, or meeting points. I think
Yeah,
Chaco was very empty. You take a
gotcha.
city
And that's
like,
exactly why I asked.
let's take Cusco. Let's just take them one at a time here. Cusco, capital of the Inca world. I think that there were a whole lot of people that lived there year round, but that we know that there were residences that were only seasonally occupied. It wasn't like the question stated, like that these were farmers that were doing something outside and came in only for a season. These were like the houses of dignitaries. One of the things the Inca would do when they took over, a village after village after village as they were creating the empire, one of the carrots they'd use to the mayor of that town of 3,000 people, they'd say, look, you just play ball and we will make you a house in Cusco. You will have a home in Cusco and you will be, required to show up once a year or so, but then you can be here. But so there was a whole lot of things that were built in Cusco that were purposely seasonal occupation for
Mhm.
those leaders from around the empire to come in at key times when the empire had their kind of check. Inti Raymi was one of those times where people from all around the empire had to come in and report the state of their section. Now, Teotihuacan, or no, let's go to, no, they didn't mention Tenochtitlan, did they? That was the Aztec capital. They said Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, I don't think there were a lot of people that were living outside of it for part of the year. Its sprawl was so huge and its urban density was so huge. I think people lived there year round. It was very different than these other cities that are in this question because Teotihuacan evolved strangely. We know that its initial population were kind of refugees from the volcanic disaster around Huiquilco, which was the big city before it. So a lot of people just showed up there because it had good farmland and because they were run out by a volcanic disaster. And then the big pyramids and the main street are made. The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Avenue of the Dead are made. But all of those are made and done and never touched again after 250 CE. From then on, the next 400 years, they build nothing but huge apartment complexes that hold 50 to 200 people each. And they make a big gridded street system. And so in the case of Teotihuacan, it's clear that city resources were being used to create more and more and more residential areas for people, which would lead us to the conclusion that they had a ever increasing population that they had to accommodate, not a seasonal group that came in and out. So what do we got left? Cahokia. Cahokia. Again, a very different scenario, Cahokia, a lot of people call it the primordial city of the Mississippians, where they were kind of like, figuring out how to get it right. And there were, there's an enclosure wall around Cahokia. And the people that got to live in there, I think, were of one status. But there were a whole lot of satellite places. I think, that's their first foray into corn farming as a way to increase your population. And we can see that there were people that were drawn to Cahokia. And and a lot of them didn't actually get to be inside the walls. I think there was again, theory, not facts. Uh, that wall was separating the haves and the have-nots. You were either in Cahokia's you know, exclusive group of clans, or you weren't. Because there's a whole lot of satellite villages with a lot of people in them that are DNA not from the area that are living outside. I think they had the right to come in and to trade, but they didn't live there. So there were a lot of, day-to-day people that came into Cahokia. But another thing that makes Cahokia really different is that it was a flash in the pan. I mean,
Hmm.
Teotihuacan survives for 800 years. Cahokia, 100? And then it's gone. It's abandoned. Something went terribly wrong there. The Mississippian civilization continued on. But whatever Cahokia was trying to do, it didn't work because everybody left. It's funny. I think that the a casual understanding of Mississippian civilization gives one the idea that all of these cities, their cities were contemporaneous. But actually, Cahokia burned out way early. It was gone by 1100, maybe 1150. And so the rest of them, continued in one form or another, sprouting up, rising and falling all the way to the Spanish contact. But Cahokia, despite the fact that it was the biggest one they ever made, was a candle that burned bright and then burned out quick.
Speaking of large population centers, we have a question. Unfortunately, I didn't bring it up before, but it's a question about the Black Hills and exactly why centers like the Midwest, centers like in between other populated zones. So here it is from DK O'Goul. Why were the South Dakota Badlands, Black Hills, Nebraska Sands Hills never settled more permanently? So I guess the underlying question is, what is the different social stratification, social network, or even just is it just geographic that allows these different regions to have, like Cahokia, several large metropolitan areas versus somewhere like Nebraska, Sandhills, Black Hills, that doesn't seem to have any large centers of civilization, but rather more pastoral?
So we're talking about pre-Columbian times. We're not talking about today.
Yes. Mhm.
I think it was about resources that civilization was interested in the time. The Mississippian sites like Cahokia were able to feed a population of people by the relatively new introduction of corn that could
Mhm.
feed people at a scale never before. But they had to be in the right places to grow that corn. And the right places are along those rivers. It's the Mississippi, it's the Ohio. They do go once you hit the mountains, you're in a different place. You're also the farther north you go, the harder it is to grow corn. There are microclimates where you can grow it. It's being grown in Canada in certain microclimates along rivers. But I think at least by that time, by the time that uh, mound builder people, which I hate that term, uh, were really in their populations were increasing. The key to that increase was corn. And you just can't grow it in the Black Hills like you can grow it along the plains.
All right. So mostly about the resources that they were able to garner and what that would support.
Right. So they would go out and get resources from those areas, but the big population centers didn't land there because they frankly couldn't survive there. There just wasn't, you know, corn was a revolution that you could feed a larger population and stay in a single place.
Mhm.
It stopped, that's that they oftentimes, and there's big holes in the theory, but generally speaking, the advent of agriculture ends the hunting and gathering cycle.
Hmm.
And
Fascinating.
for the Mississippians, that's it was corn.
So
And you can't
speaking,
grow corn in the Black Hills very well. Nowadays we can, but we got technology.
and different varieties of corn and all these other practices. Fascinating. So that actually perfectly lends to my next question. I'll find the exact person in just a moment, but people are asking, were there different types of people or even subsets of cultures that were more practiced, more geared towards long distance travel? I know, like in the Aztec Empire, we have the Pochteca, right? People that were specifically merchants meant to go long distances, gather information, sell their wares. Were there any, I would say, guilds? Were there any aspects, groups within civilizations, cultures that we know of that were specifically sent out to go gather resources from a long portion away and bring it back to somewhere like the Black Hills, the Sand Hills, that didn't have as many resources? Or even vice versa, from a metropolitan center out to the countryside, stay there for a while, come back.
In North America,
Yes.
I don't know of any, culturally named group like the Pochteca or, the Chasquis of South America, the runners that ran down the roads and went long distances. I don't think I've ever heard of any, specific like occupation that was that traveler. But we have abundance evidence that that did happen. Poverty Point, which is our oldest one in Louisiana, they had a pyramid at 1500 BCE. Uh, there's clear evidence at Poverty Point that they have things from Ohio. They have things like
Wow.
mica. They have their very first, before they even start ceramics, they're using this soapstone, which we know comes from Georgia. So they were
Hmm.
early on, they were wide travelers. There's an interesting story that I think about in DeSoto's travels. DeSoto did that kind of just scorched earth, terrible 3 year trip through the Americas in the 1540s. But he meets a very advanced civilization run, they're the Kofitakachi, and their queen is called Kofitakachi. And DeSoto gives her the line he gave everybody, I'm looking for these metals. I want these yellow and silver metals. And she says, "Oh, I know what you're talking about, and we know where they are. Let me just send my people out, and we'll get you what you want." So 3 days later, they show up with a bunch of copper. But this is South Carolina. This is near where Columbia, South Carolina is. Nowhere near there. They probably had to send people. The closest source there is the Great Lakes. So, in a matter of days, this queen was able to say, "Hold your horses, DeSoto. I think I know what you're talking about. I'm going to send some people to get it, and they're going to bring it back." And in a 3 day period, she sent people from South Carolina somewhere
Wow.
who collected a bunch of copper and brought it back to him.
That
So,
is that is fascinating. It brings to mind things like the Silk Road, which I'll bring up here. Do you think that most of those trade networks, most of the moving of goods, was along systems like the Silk Road, where it kind of stops at different points and gets ferried further and further, not necessarily by one group? Or do you think it was more? We have guests from the Great Lakes. They brought us copper. We'll house them until their return trip.
they were definitely like the Maya, where they were the Mississippians, I'm saying, like a collection of city states that had allies and enemies. And I do think there was a road system that they followed back and forth. DeSoto said it a number of times. You know, I'm amazed that DeSoto's story and what he saw isn't in every textbook in the Americas. It was outrageous how the things he like Kofitakachi, he followed major roads through village after village until they were out of her territory, and then they were somewhere in Tennessee and going down into Alabama. And at that point, they were saying that that was the territory of Tuscaloosa.
Hmm.
And Tuscaloosa's territory had amazingly well manicured roads. He said wide roads that were like, 40, 50 feet across that would go from
Wow.
village to village. And they weren't wandering the countryside looking for more Indians. They were following major uh, transportation routes that were established as like highways between cities.
Wow. Wow. It just blows my mind. They really had such advanced infrastructure. They had such advanced trade routes, economic systems, architecture, the entire nine yards. And exactly why do we not know more about it?
You know why? I'll tell
Um,
you why. Because in the same documents that he documents and his crew documents, there's this guy named the gentleman from Elvis who was the main scribe for the group.
mhm.
And he wrote everything down in great detail, including all the times that Soda was a total asshole to everyone. And, like, oh, these people won't give us their corn. How about we just rip apart their leaders with dogs? We'll have our dogs eat them in front of everybody, and then they'll behave and give us the corn. There's a real shame in how he
Gotcha.
behaved while he witnessed this incredible civilization, and a further shame that the next groups that went into those same regions found them abandoned, overgrown, just, sun-soaked, bleached bones everywhere. I mean, between the disease and just the utter disruption and chaos of what he destroyed those civilizations. And
Absolutely.
it's a
Wow.
shame. And America doesn't want to talk about it.
Exactly. It is so sad that we would rather protect uh, a disreputable man rather than glorify our past.
I mean, shit.
Um,
Have you ever seen I have a podcast episode that I just called DeSoto Was a Psycho. Um,
Unfortunately, not. Unfortunately,
and
I'll have to go watch
but
that.
but if you grew up and you went to DeSoto High School, this is unsavory information for you. Like shit, am
Absolutely.
I gonna have to burn my DeSoto High School shirt? I mean, wasn't he a hero? Wait, he's not a hero?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk another time about how America is filled with people like that.
I have a dream.
But
This moment that we're talking about. Let me go back to the question. Sorry, I'm digressing for a minute, but I'd like your audience to know that I'm gonna make it happen one of these days. I want to make a new kind of textbook for K through 12
mm,
that is just don't talk about contact. Forget about that period. Let's talk about the cultures of the Americas. I would call it would be called Before the Americas.
mhm,
And it would just talk about all the wonderful things that these folks did and the fact that there were true civilizations here. And let's just not talk about the tragedy of contact. Let's just keep that out of there and make textbooks so people would know that these wonderful civilizations are there. And I'll leave it to other books to talk about
mhm.
how shitty the contact was. That way we can honor these folks without tainting it with the horrible events of contact.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're getting comments in the chat as well that people are excited for things like that, and I know absolutely I am on board. I believe the entire community would be on board because we really do have an appreciation of the cultures that came before us, and it is such a shame that we focus on the destruction of those cultures rather than celebrating what they achieved without having to think of, that tragedy that has been that the tragedy
It's
that
it's
it
it's
has been
natural
taken
that we
away
say,
from
wow, the Inca, that was amazing. What happened to those guys? Well, Shit. You know?
You'd never guess, but absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure we would love to pitch in, do whatever we can, raise awareness about that book series because even while we do on our, our Discord, our Reddit pages is expressly that, talking about just how amazing and wonderful the people who were here before the Europeans were, and really is something to celebrate. Um, so thank you for bringing that out. I'm glad that we now have
No
that to
problem.
look forward to.
One of these
Um,
days, I'm going to get the funding. I'm just looking, I'm putting myself out there like this, one of these moments, some,
mhm. Yeah,
billionaire with an agenda is gonna drop a mill on me, and I will make that happen.
absolutely, absolutely. And if not, we have a community, and we can always spread the word through there. So that's absolutely wonderful to hear that you're thinking about that. One more question I want to talk about: thinking about people before the Europeans. In our modern idea, we have this notion, especially in America, that we're immigrants, right? That we come from somewhere else. We come here to make a better life. We come here to enjoy these resources that we didn't have wherever we might have come from. Was there any form of immigration? Was there any form of a family moving from one cultural region, from one city state to another city state to remake their life, or was that just kind of unheard of back then? I know, if you may.
I don't think we have access to that kind of information beyond things like, the things we call myths and legends.
Mhm.
There's such a deep amount of information in like all the modern tribes have their stories that are now kind of thought up as parables, but these stories of people who migrate or clash. But nothing, nothing that conservative anthropology would take as history. It stays in the realm of stories and myths. I mean, there's the uh, physical evidence that the Navajo moved into the American Southwest as a culture group very late. There's these conflicts between the Navajo and the Pueblo groups now about who was there. Especially the Navajo say they built Chaco Canyon. Um, that's I don't think that's true. But we do definitely see that they were a late entry, a group that was a culture group that moved into the American Southwest late, before European contact, but not, they don't share ancestry with the Pueblo people that started with what we call the basket maker people and onward. They moved from kind of the uh like Washington State area down. So that's an interesting one of that. But I don't think we have a lot of that information. In fact, gosh, there are things. One of the ones that really boggle my mind as far as immigration and contact. How do we have almost nothing to say that the people of the American Southwest, those three big cultures, and the Mississippians ever met each other? They don't
Mhm.
share artifacts, they don't share religion. There's no roads connecting them. Their architecture's totally different. Their way of life is totally different. It would appear on almost every level that they never met each other or even knew each other existed. But that has to be bullshit. That has to be not true. And you know, 100 years of archaeology has failed to find the artifact record of such, or the anthropological record. So I mean, that's such a tough pill for me to swallow. But I don't have any evidence to back up my just gut feeling that they were just too capable and too, human not to have wondered what's on the edge of the horizon. I mean, was there just, sometimes people explain it like, oh, West Texas, such a barren, horrible place. No one ever dare cross it. Bullshit. I know they did. Or they just hooked up through Kansas, you know? but we have no evidence. That should have been a great place to see, wasn't there, was there a Mississippian embassy in the middle of, one of the pueblos or vice versa? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's
Absolutely nothing.
boggling. And I do think that it is not that it didn't happen. It's that archaeology and our techniques at the moment can't see it.
Mm,
I love I steal the line from SETI all the time. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
absolutely. Speaking to that, we're unfortunately kind of drawing near the end, so I'm going to have a couple quick questions, and then just as a roadmap to the end, I'm going to allow you to give any book recs, any things that you're working on, any last things that I'd like that you'd like to share. So these last couple questions are going to be from Comfortable Cut 5796 on Reddit. Why are most Marajora graves men? I just cross posted this to Ancient Americas as well. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about the Marajora or their graves, so if you would like to pick that
Is he talking about the people that are at the mouth of the Amazon?
up. Marajora. Let's see. Marajora. Mahoro. Yeah, I believe so.
So look
Yeah.
at this. So,
Would you have? Yeah. So it same spelling and everything, and there is a reference to their
okay. So I know which
male
one he's talking
graves.
about.
Yes, I believe it is.
Um, uh, Unfortunately, that doesn't help me to answer his question. The people of the Amazon are very sexist. That not
Really?
it's heresy to say anything negative about indigenous people, right? They're perfect. Okay, well, but they generally speaking of what I know of the modern anthropology and meeting folks that are in the Amazon, which are not really these folks, they're a very male-dominated society. Women do not have a whole lot of positions of authority. And that might just be the simple answer that the graves they found, men got buried with disrespect and women got thrown in the trash pile. A guess,
Wow.
but I mean it happens. There's that certainly that's the first most logical answer that would come to my mind.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah. Let's see. I believe that is going to be most of the questions. We do have a couple tangential questions that are about other things that would I would like to ask you about. Let me just skim through and make sure that I'm not missing anything too much. All right. Okay, I believe that most of our questions, actually all of our questions on Reddit have been answered. And let me just double check that YouTube comment. We are good there as well. So I will wrap up with a couple questions more related to your science education and uh, your knowledge base. One question we have is from. Let me actually read the exact question. From document number 3571, hey Archeo Ed, how was it to appear on TV with Graham Hancock, and did you get backlash for doing so? Has the stone statue been spotted in the waters of Lake Peten Itza?
Okay, the more than one question, but I'll take them as they come.
Yeah.
It was fun to work with Graham Hancock. He's actually a very nice guy. Um, I enjoyed getting to meet him. I think that he and I do not share the same opinion about ancient history, but that does not mean that we're enemies. Um, so I enjoyed working with him, and I was definitely worried that people from my field would come at me.
Mhm.
That happened in a very limited sense from the usual suspects.
Mhm.
And what I was really worried about were the people that I have the most respect for the field coming at me and just saying, "Oh, why'd you do that, Ed?" But absolutely none of them did. I came, especially with that particular experience, I came to realize that the colleagues that I respect and the people that are really, making a difference in archaeology and anthropology, don't waste their time with this whole like we're in a death grip battle against pseudo archaeology. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to me. People are allowed to have their own ideas, and the most fervent in my group that are, mad at me for even talking to them, you know, I I say, look in the mirror, buddy. You're burning books. We can't do that. We can't decide, you know, that certain information can't be discussed. That's,
Hmm.
the road to fascism. And we really, sure, I know you hate Graham Hancock's books and you wish you weren't there, but you can't erase them. You
Hmm.
know, make your case in the field of ideas, in the debate.
Hmm.
Don't
And
don't just try to shut down somebody's opinion. That never works. In some
yes,
regards, the people that hate Graham Hancock the most are the ones that have made him the most freaking money.
I was just going to say, how much more productive would it be to engage in a dialogue that corrects and re-educates rather than only uh, chooses to hate and to, um, just to look for where he's wrong, rather
And Graham
than
was quite wary about me at the start, understandably.
really.
But as you know, it took about 2 or 3 days to do the whole filming in Palenque. So we got to know each other and we had discussions about our differences of ideas,
Mhm.
acknowledging that we actually understood where the other one was coming from.
Mm.
And, we there was no venom. We openly talked about our differences of ideas. And he was, very clear. Look, I'm not saying these are facts. I'm saying these are theories. Just like you're saying these are
Mhm.
theories, like a point well taken. The last thing I'll say
Mhm.
about that is Graham Hancock is not a racist. He, you could do a lot of things to say, to dis to uh about his character or his work, but he's not a racist. His wife is black and a very nice, lovely woman, and his grandchildren are black. He, at one point in the conversation, he really, something that he said that really struck me was, my grandchildren, who I love dearly, can go out on the internet and find a bunch of stuff that says their granddad is a racist. And then they come back to me and say, hey, are you a racist? And this is just, that's crushing. Like what
Mhm.
granddad wants a bunch of slander out there, saying things, say what you want about his theories, but those personal, ad hominem attacks, they've got no place in scholarship or in just civilized society.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's an amazing point because sometimes we do get so wrapped up in the science and the stances of what our evidence brings that we forget that, these are people too. And they have just as much of an identity and just as much as a complex emotional state as we do. And so to supplant their ideas for their personality and then to attack both of them at the same time is just it's unacademic, it's unprofessional, just like you said. So I'm really glad that you bring that out because there is so much animosity and discourse around pseudo archaeology that I think sometimes we take our eye off of the education part of it and we get into the argument part of it just a little bit too much. So thank you for bringing that
And
up.
especially in your Reddit crowd, I'd like to just bring up, at least from my perspective, the people on either side of this kind of hostile debate against, academia and pseudo whatever. The people that are actually fueling those things, they're a minority of each group, and they are little dogs who bark loud. The majority
Mm.
of us can and should continue a civil debate and openly acknowledge what we know, what we don't know, what's theory. And, if we just stop yelling at each other, maybe we could actually come up with some, group held conclusions about some of these things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that's something watching you because I love conspiracy theories, pseudo archaeology, all that. So that is a thing that I find a lot is that some of these people have theories that are very much out of base. but that doesn't mean that they aren't looking at the evidence, that they aren't also bringing theories that might have just as much water in them. Just we have to come at it with an open mind. And speaking of what we know, what we don't know, what our theories are, we have a couple questions actually that are asking for book recommendations. I know one of them had just read Camilla Townsend's The Fifth Son. I feel like that's very basic reading. That's very entry level recommendation for us. Do you have anything else specifically about the ways in which different cultural or geographic regions are related? Do you have any book recommendations on those subjects?
Okay. Hmm. Interconnectedness, not a whole lot. I will say, let's take it at a different angle. A
Mhm.
lot of the really in-depth information you're not going to find in a book, and you're not going to trust it off the internet. It's the where I go to find information that's vetted and peer reviewed are the journals. And the
Mhm.
journals used to be very obscure and difficult to get at. But there's this system, it's not new, it's been out for more than a decade now, but it's called academia.edu. And it is a searchable database of a really wide range of journals. And so you can type in, Inca mummies, and it will show you all of the papers in its database. It's kind of, it's a better version of JSTOR. You ever heard of JSTOR? People have definitely, yeah, anybody that's gone to college has the JSTOR thing. You got to pay money for JSTOR. If you're a student, you have access to it in a student library. I guess alumni would have the same thing. But academia.edu has a free side of it. And of course, they'd like you to pay more. But you can use it for free and find all sorts of stuff. And when I want to go, deeper than a textbook treatment of something, I go to academia.edu a lot because it'll show me journal papers. And then the other tip I'd tell people, if you really want to deep dive into something, find a paper as recent as possible that covers that topic. Even if it's not a very good paper, look at its bibliography. Its
Mhm.
bibliography is going to have all sorts of leads to specific studies that maybe are more targeted to what you want to find. That's just, a little, research techniques 101 that I use to try to, when I was doing that Olmec thing, I relied heavily on these old journals, and academia.edu gets me access to a lot of them that used to be behind paywalls.
Mhm.
But as far as,
Very
one that talks about the interconnectedness of the Americas, they're really not there. I do see one that I want to see, like an hour and a half ago, somebody said, where can I read about these 30 to 60-year-old sites? Let me
yes, sir.
qualify that those were not sites. That is DNA studies, looking at the variation in DNA of Native American populations over time, looking at the artifact records. And the thing that I was specifically referring to, like the one that was really good graphics, it was done. It was also like a decade ago. Was a study out of A&M, Texas A&M University. So I think if you put in like in the search engine Texas A&M DNA archaeology, it would it would get you to that study. I don't remember offhand what the name of it was, but that was big breaking news. Specifically the 30, maybe 60 was out of Texas A&M about a decade ago, and I bet you those same researchers have gone farther now.
Very
Hard to
nice.
keep track of all this stuff. I
It
I
really
haven't
is.
I
It
haven't
is.
read a book for leisure in freaking decades. I used to love to read science fiction. Now I just try to keep up
Yeah.
with my field.
Oh, I understand that. I understand. I understand that. Audible is a great resource for that, and there's a few more audiobooks, but
Yeah.
I understand. Reading takes a lot of time, and thank you for giving us an area where we can go and do more of that. Um, Thank you again so much for your time today. It's been a wonderful discussion today. I love the questions that we've gotten from all over the Americas. And that being said, we are going to start wrapping it up here. We have just a couple different questions. First, I would like for you, if you have any plugs that you'd like, YouTube channels, Patreons, upcoming projects that you're working on, anything that you would like us to know about, please, at this moment.
Well, thanks. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel that's archaeologist Ed Barnhart. I've got my podcast, which is Archeo Ed. That's on YouTube as well, but everywhere podcasts are. A funny thing, I don't have guests on. I just talk on a subject. So it's a little different. I only do it once a month and not in the summers, but these are all ways that I'm trying to, both do public outreach like what we're doing right now, but honestly, it's also how I'm going to continue to grow as a scholar. I'm 56 this year. I can't keep leading people into the jungle. One of these days, I'm going to break a hip on
Right.
a pyramid, and if I haven't grown into other ways where I can move out of being the guy in the field and now I'm the guy in the professor chair, but
Mhm.
I don't want to be part of a university. I mean, not that nothing wrong with universities, but being part of an academic department is soul sucking. So
Any
I don't
part
want
of the
to do that.
bureaucratic process.
And I'm learning too that, as much as people are watching me on YouTube and the podcast, that Google's algorithm where they pay you for the ads, it sucks. They take the lion's share and they give creators nothing. So I really depend on Patreon.
Mhm.
I've done this podcast circuit enough to realize that there's always somebody behind the curtain who's the real brains. There's the guy who's the person who's interviewing me, but I go around the curtain and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And more often than not, it's really Patreon that's saving them. They don't. That's making saving them, making them successful. Patreon gives a lot more to their creators than those other systems. So that's kind of what I'm hanging my star on. The more I can get people to contribute, just like, $5 a month or something to what I do, I'll have the freedom to create a lot more content and, scale the learning curve I have to make that content better.
Mhm.
So those, I'm really trying to be, I guess the term now is science communicator. That's what I'm trying to grow into being, and I hope that your audience, if nothing else, tuning in is great. But
Mhm.
supporting, if you choose to do it, I prefer Patreon.
Perfect, perfect. And we'll be adding those links as well, both to your Patreon with your podcast, your YouTube, and then would you like us to know about any of your books? Would you like us to know about any other projects that you're working on? I know you had mentioned the kids' book.
Well, yes, I have a textbook I'm dreaming of, and it's funny, the majority of my publication history has been video. I think the
Hmm.
world is going video. I love my books, as you can tell, but people like I've got 5 kids. And they love their books for other reasons, but when they want to learn something, they go to the videos. They go
Hmm.
to YouTube, they go to Reddit, they go to all these sources. And so most of my publication efforts have been the great courses and now things that I'm doing independently. The great courses, I have 5 different shows on. Collectively, I think I now have 124 30-minute lectures. So
Wow.
those are my books. My
Hmm.
publications are my videos. And Great Courses is a wonderful way to learn not just about my stuff, but all sorts of stuff. They've got great professors, and now they have a streaming platform called Great
Oh, really?
Courses Plus. They've got free trials for 2 weeks. And it's
Hmm.
not just me, it's hundreds of really the top professors explaining, subjects from math to art and amazing stuff. But those are my publications. I have, edited volumes and papers and journals. If you want to see, where I put most of my in print publications is right on Maya Exploration Center's website. Probably should have
Hmm.
mentioned that. I'm the director of Maya Exploration Center, a nonprofit. And in there, I have online publications, and a lot of my papers are right there, along with my colleagues' papers. So if you want to read things specifically from me, they're free, they're PDFs. My dissertation's there, my master's, and about 10 other papers I've written. I'm I'm right off screen here. I'm just about to finish another one about ancient Khmer astronomy in Cambodia. I'll put that one up there.
Wow.
I'm kind of over, the journal thing is great, but between creating, submitting, peer review, final publication, if you have a good idea and you want to get it into a journal in today's world, it's like 2 or 3 years later that it happens. So the peer review system is broken. That's another terribly unpopular idea of mine from with my field, but it's broken.
Yeah.
It needs fixing. This whole
Hmm.
we've gone over our time now, but let me just fire up your audience by saying the uh, the academias who bitch that uh, people like Graham Hancock don't have any peer review, so it's illegitimate. Our peer review system sucks. And just because a couple of other anthropologists read your paper and argued doesn't mean that you have great ideas either. I mean,
Hmm.
you know, the academia stands on peer review like it's some kind of pillar that the rest of the world doesn't have. That's just, that's that's a colleague reading your paper. And it's become just a Frankenstein version of what it should be. I'll
Hmm.
leave it at that.
Gotcha.
Peer review's not as cool as you think it is.
Unfortunately, most things are not as cool as they seem on first glance. But if we would like to take a second glance at Dr. Edwin Barnhart's work, we have our links here, his YouTube, his Patreon, the Maya Exploration Center, and we'll go ahead and link the great courses as well. That being said, thank you again for everybody that showed up. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest, and thank you for your questions as well. On the final note, we'd like to thank Dr. Edwin Barnhart again for joining us, taking the time out of his day, and being such a well of knowledge about so many different things. I was amazed that you could just pull out sources, pull out different pieces of information and data. Again, from your long stretch in the field. So, thank you again for your time and your knowledge. And hopefully, we'll see you again in some other form, perhaps on another talk like this discussion or something a little longer, a little bit more keynote speaker ish, whatever it might be. Hopefully, we see you soon, and hopefully, we get to talk to you and understand your knowledge as well. So, thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, Dr. Edwin Barnhart, and the rest of those that have joined us here today. Have a good day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. All right. How are we doing? Are you...
All right, cool. I do believe that's where I'm going to end the stream when we edit it and everything. I'm just making sure that I don't accidentally delete the recording
Yeah, let me
and let
hang here until
everybody.
you're sure